You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, your partner, and your world. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is simple: to help you navigate life with more clarity, more confidence, and purpose-driven action, with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast. Super excited today to have my guest, Dr. Jeremy Goldberg, a good friend of mine and absolute everyday legend. Someone who I think we can learn so much from in terms of how he lives his life, and you'll hear a lot of that in this episode today, but also learn a lot from, because he's such an intelligent, switched on, and phenomenal dude who knows so much about human behaviour and understanding your shit, figuring your shit out, and ultimately behaviour change. He's a doctor. He is basically a doctor in behavioural change. But beyond that, he is a ferocious never give upper, a collector of silver linings, as he says in this episode. I love the way he describes himself, and perhaps my favourite is love bomb making kindness pirate. And so to give you his perhaps more formal bio, Jeremy is making kindness cool and the world better than it was yesterday. He has worked for governments and universities for over a decade, is an expert in human behaviour, I've just got to get that in there, and spent 5 years studying how our brains influence our actions, and wrote a PhD thesis about it. He is a ferocious optimist who desperately wants you to shine your light bright. He coaches private clients, leads retreats, gives talks, podcasts, workshops, courses, all the goodness, including a course that he has right now called Do Hard Shit. And for me, that kind of speaks to this dude who, as he says, he does hard shit. He knows his life is easier when he does hard shit because, by default, he's a lazy dude. And whilst that might sound like, I don't know, a twisted way to go about things, for me it speaks to how genuine and authentic and himself Jeremy is. There is some really cool stuff in here that we're going to learn about behaviour change, but also we're going to look at some stuff around men, and through his own personal experience of learning and evolving, how we can often sit in a place of codependency, which is to say, in our relationships, we can often sit in a place where we try and fix other people's feelings, take other people's feelings away. We make them responsible for our own feelings. And, you know, as Jer gives in some of his examples, learning to sit in his own discomfort so people can process their own stuff and support them in a way that is supportive to them, not in a way that just removes our own discomfort in our own feelings or someone else's feelings. We talk a bit about the climate, but not much, because more so, even though that's a huge passion of his, we're talking about behaviour change, because that's where his studies led him to. If we're screwing up the planet, how do we actually change people's behaviours? Pamphlets and information doesn't do it. We need to facilitate and encourage the changing of beliefs and therefore the changing of behaviours. There's some beautiful gems in this, as there always is with a conversation with Jeremy, or Jer, as you may hear me refer to him. I look forward to you listening to this episode. As always, if this lands with you, if you enjoy it, please share it with someone. Let me know that you're listening to it and what you're taking from it. Reach out to me on social media, tag me, let me know that you're listening and the parts that you're enjoying. And as always, if you're not yet, make sure you click subscribe or follow where you get your podcasts. And my ask of you, share this with someone, and please visit Apple Podcasts and leave a review and a rating. It lets me know what you think of it, of course, which is amazing feedback, and it helps get it in front of the more people's ears and eyes. With that said, let's start the show. So, okay, well, let's start. Dr. Jeremy Goldberg, welcome to the Everyday Legends podcast, brother.
I'm so excited that you started a podcast at long last, and very stoked to be here, man. Thank you.
Thank you. I remember we had a conversation a little while ago. I interviewed you. You had a conversation for one of my coaching programs, and we recorded it. And then you were like, "Hey, by the way, this is a podcast. Just start a podcast. What you just did was a podcast episode." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, I will." And here we are. Thank you for that little push in the back. Sometime I listened.
I appreciate it. And I also got a push in the back when I started my podcast. I don't know if you know this, but our mutual buddy, Traver Bohm, I referred him a coaching client, and he mailed me a microphone, like as a thank you. And he's like, start your fucking podcast. And the microphone sat on my desk for like maybe 3 weeks. And I just stared at it, and I was scared and overwhelmed and didn't know what to do. So I think it's important. Yeah, we all need a nudge now and again.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I think we can explore that shortly. But before we do that, I want to do the who the hell is this guy on my podcast? Because, I know a chunk of my audience will know you. Some might not at all. So here's what I want to hit you with, Jer. Who is Dr. Jeremy Goldberg?
Oh, it's deep. Do you want like the professional version?
I want you to go wherever that answer speaks to you.
So thank you, Michael Campbell, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I am a recovering scientist turned writer, speaker, coach, ranter, podcaster, author. I'm a ferocious never giver upper. I'm a passionate collector of silver linings. I'm an anti-quitting word wizard is what's on my business card. I basically am like trying to start a kindness revolution in my spare time. I'm trying to make compassion cool and empathy popular. I do that by writing primarily. So I have a book and a podcast. I have an Instagram account, and I'm just trying to make the world better than yesterday. And the way that I do that is by integrating my scientific background. So I spent many years working up in Townsville on the Great Barrier Reef doing environmental management, and I did a PhD about human behavior and behavior change and why we do the things we do. And so I use that as kind of a basis for my coaching and my work to try to present that stuff in a way that doesn't like fill people's brains with sawdust and boredom, like is how I learned it. So I kind of use profanity, and I use analogy, and I tell stories, and I try to have some fun, but I basically am just trying to share the insights and the experiences that I've learned so that others don't have to learn it the hard way like I did.
Okay. Yeah, fuck sawdust. So, okay, I heard some beautiful things in there. And one of the things that I want to ask is, okay, so there's, kind of all those beautiful things you're doing now, and coming off that kind of background of science. In fact, the first thing you said was a recovering scientist. So that, collector of silver linings, the ferocious never giver upper. Did I say that right? Has it kind of always been that way for you?
I don't think so. I think it's been somewhat cultivated through various life experiences over the years. Like I don't recall as a teenager being the guy in the group that was like, we can do it, boys. Like, come on, let's go. Believe in yourself. Like, that was not necessarily me.
Are you saying that as you now?
Yeah, like now I think it probably is me to some extent.
With some profanity and a story in there.
Like at a deeper level, it's me. Although last year I took 8 women on a 200-kilometer walk in Spain with one of my best closest friends, right? As part of a walking retreat that I did. And we're like on day 3 or 4 or whatever. And I said to my buddy, it's going pretty good. Like none of the women are like complaining, like nobody's whining. And he kind of smiled and looked at me and was like, yeah, man, I think you're complaining the most out of anybody. So I which I think is hilarious. So I share that of, yeah, I have definitely part of me that doesn't enjoy suffering, doesn't like doing hard stuff. But then there's like a deeper, perhaps more wise component that knows that I'm capable of doing those things and that it's good for me and all that shit. So I think it's been cultivated through the years of like, it just makes more logical sense for me to choose optimism instead of choosing pessimism.
Right. Very nice. So there's like a scientific kind of assessment of that in some degree.
Yeah, it's like we all get to choose, right? So I've done the whole science thing, and the reason I say I'm like a recovering scientist is because a lot of my work that I do now is probably more categorically correct under an artist. So writing, public speaking, I do like some spoken word poetry stuff. It's more creative, feelings, intuitive, whereas the scientific side was more rational, analytical. So up in my brain a lot, and now I've been trying to get like into my heart and my body to be creative. So yeah, that's been the journey, I suppose, over the last several years. Primarily is uncovering what I really desire and then shifting my identity in a big way to acknowledge that and to step into that space, which is hard, right, and weird, and it's like uncomfortable.
Well, I can assume that at some point there was some form of an identity shift from PhD student, PhD recipient, even though, you are a doctor, right? And that's still clearly part of who you are, no doubt. But then to this other version of yourself, did that feel obvious to you?
Looking back, it's very obvious. It's kind of like chapters in a book is the way that I look at it, of like, oh, I had that 5-year chapter where I was a research scientist and doing a PhD, and I lived at that place and I worked for the government, and like I had the cubicle in CSIRO, like CSIRO, the big scientific group in Australia, and like the swipe card, and I wore the collared shirts. Like that was distinctly a chapter. And then there was a chapter that followed that in which I spent 4 months kind of living in a rusted van, driving around America, just filling my cup back up because I was completely exhausted and burnt out. And then the chapter that followed, which is the one I'm still in, is the kind of solo entrepreneurial, you're going to be a life coach and a writer full time. You're going to work on the internet and somehow figure out a way to make money by being yourself and teaching people how to live better, even though you don't necessarily feel like you've got it sorted. So that's like the space I'm in now. And I think that as those chapters progress, we can all relate to that. Like we all used to be students or sons, daughters. Then maybe we got our first partner and we're a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or now you're a dad. So I know that you recognize how powerful these chapters can enter your life and your space. And yeah, so it's been kind of an evolution over the years of acknowledging the resistance that I have for those transitions, and then embracing them and owning them, and then kind of deciding to go all in, so to speak, and be like, all right, game on, let's go. I'm in.
Beautiful. So then, there's this big 5-year chapter where, climate was, I suppose, the thing, but the context around it was behavioral change and learning how do we change people's behaviors in regards to the climate. Yes.
Yeah, that's an easy way to say it. Yeah.
I've read your thesis.
Yeah, nobody's read my thesis. I think it was like 6 people that have read my thesis. I was working on the Great Barrier Reef because I'm very passionate about the planet. Like, I really like being alive. I really love the world. I like to hike, I scuba dive, I snowboard. I like being outdoors. I'm awestruck by the magic of the universe. And I get really pissed off that humans are fucking everything up, for lack of a more polite phrase. And I hope that I can use profanity in this conversation, but
May.
that's what's happening. We're fucking everything up. And so my thesis was like, how can we save the Great Barrier Reef? And how can we change the social, cultural, individual decisions related to the reef? Because like the fish are cool, the fish are fine. If we just like leave them alone and like let them be, the planet is fine. The problem is that humans are making a lot of poor decisions when it comes to the long-term care of our world. And so I was interested in that. I've been working in that space for many years. And what usually happens is you give people pamphlets or you tell them facts, and then you just kind of have this intuitive, rational idea that, well, now that they know better, they'll do better.
Yeah.
And
if I give them the information, then, hey,
yeah,
they'll do something different.
Yeah, it's like, oh, if you just go to therapy, then your marriage will be better. So that's why every man is in therapy in Australia, right? It's like, no, that's not how it works. So there's a gap. There's a knowledge behavior gap. And I was intrigued by that gap. I was intrigued by what the science suggested, what research showed as being effective ways to intervene with individuals. And so I read a bunch of like psychology, sociology, marketing, communication, try to figure that out. At the same time, I was like doing my own research in my own personal life, getting into spirituality, personal development, self-help, all that kind of stuff.
Very nice. So then what I'm interested to explore in that is, because you clearly learnt a lot about humans and human behavior. And at the same time, as you said, you were exploring some things for yourself. Do you think that through that process, you started to learn a lot more about yourself and about, your own behaviors and what will change them in a very simple level?
Yeah, 100%. It's like when you read a really good book and you have that moment where you read a sentence, or maybe you listen to a podcast, fingers crossed it's this podcast, but you like have this epiphany of like, oh shit, I've never thought of it that way. Or, oh my gosh, that's totally how I've been living my life. And those are the results I'm getting. And this is a new idea that feels internally like a hell yes. And so I'm going to try that. And so there was a lot of that for me as a student, as a PhD student. The first 4 to 6 months, essentially you are tasked with just reading. It's like, just read, like get the background information on the topics that you want to study, like learn enough as a foundation that you can then ask some interesting probing questions that contribute to that knowledge base. So I was just reading my face off for like months and months of like chasing things down rabbit holes. Like for a while I was interested in happiness. Right. And so I was reading a lot about the literature of happiness and, well-being. So yeah, man, definitely learned a lot about my own problems and my own ways of doing and thinking as a consequence of learning, for sure.
So would you say then in that process, and maybe beyond it, but I'm interested to kind of come to this big genesis of like behavior change, I suppose. Did you start to see, perhaps any events, any, I don't know, aspects of your own life or upbringing that you made kind of a bit of a realization like, oh, shit, that's been playing a big part on how I, these behaviors, how I show up in the world here, the beliefs that I have, they need to change. How do I do that? Oh, now I'm armed with, some of the literature at the very least to do that.
Yeah. So have you ever heard of this word codependency, Mike?
I have.
You familiar with that?
I am.
Or the like Mr. Nice Guy paradigm?
Very much. Very familiar with a lot of my listeners too.
Yeah. So this idea of putting other people's feelings over yourself, of prioritizing other people, of being the helper, the yes man, the like, I've got to fix it. That definitely for me was a thing, and I'm still, feel like codependence has its claws in parts of me still. It shows up time to time.
How?
Like just like feelings or actions that are kind of reacting to a situation or an emotional expression. And then I pause for a moment, or I walk away for an hour or a day, and I'm like, hang on, like, what's going on? Right. So I think there's the personal development aspect in which we are all somehow screwed up from childhood as a fact. Like, our parents have screwed us up with loving kindness and the most wholehearted intention to be perfect. Like, we've got some lingering stuff. Like, screwed up is maybe a bit too harsh. We've got some things that we can improve upon.
Yeah, maybe
right?
the result, some of those frustrating things that we experience and keep seeing in our lives is perhaps the result of, our formative years when we were formed, so to speak.
Exactly, right? So a codependence example, if hypothetically your parents divorced when you were 6 and your mom became an alcoholic, and you were kind of the man of the house as a 6-year-old, I learned, hypothetically, this person learned to not like to grow up too quick. So for me, it was like mom's feeling sad. I need to fix it. Like, because that's what the man of the house does. I had no idea as a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old what was going on. I just knew that I felt this urge or this burden to help, to take care of, right? So there's like,
and kind of take away the pain.
Exactly, right? Yeah. And so a lot of the things that we do as adults that are unhealthy served us in a great, profound way as kids. Like, they gave us attention, we received love, we got connection from doing those things. And that's great back then. But as adults in a different circumstance with different humans, some of those things are no longer healthy. Those things are now unhealthy, right? And so
would you say, before you jump in, go on, sorry, I want to jump in. So would you say then, in that example, this hypothetical person, the benefit at that time was, like a calmer household, like, for an obvious benefit, or because as you said, it serves a purpose at the time, taking away your mother's pain, taking away the discomfort of you seeing it, or like it was a better situation because I did that. But then it led to places that it wasn't beneficial.
Yeah. So in the moment, it would be like, mom stopped crying. My sister stopped yelling. Things were calmer. There was a superficial peace. Yeah. Right. Okay. It helped in that moment. Right. But so perhaps a negative thing of that, as an adult who was navigating relationship with women, I don't know if you're familiar with women, they're different than men in beautiful, powerful ways. But so, because as a kid, I had been sort of taught, or I had learned that when a woman is upset, it's a good thing to stop that, like, fix that. That tears are bad. That sadness is to be avoided. It's like an imperfection, right? And so in the women that I have dated, that's not necessarily helpful or appreciated or healthy, right? This idea that emotions are bad, that tears indicate weakness, that if somebody is hurting, that they can't take care of themselves, like that I need to step in and fix it, right? And perhaps that if somebody is unwell, if somebody that I care about is crying, that like I also have to be unwell and I also have to be sad and cry. Like, I can't just be me
Mm.
living and loving my life at the
If I'm
same
killing it, I
time.
have to kind of bring myself down to where they
Yeah.
are, right? Otherwise, is that fear that I'm having a good time or something, right?
Yeah. It's like, I can't be happy if you're sad. That's just not how it goes. That's not okay. Right. So the risk of that, of course, is that anytime somebody that I care about was sad or angry or emotional, then I take that on, even though
Mm.
it's not my shit. So like one thing I've written about is in any relationship, there's my shit, and then there's your shit, and then there's the relationship shit. There's like our shit. And so what I was doing for a long time in relationship was taking their shit and making it my shit, and then
Mm.
taking our shit and making it my shit, and then I had my own shit, and it was like
Mm.
this fertile soil of just lots of shit, right? And so I think the work that I've done through the years and I'm still doing is like unpacking all that, trying to figure out why I do those things, and then putting up the boundaries and learning new skill sets so that I can be like, hang on, like that's not mine. You're crying right now, but like that's okay. Like
Mm.
I can handle this. I can hold space. And so that's the personal development side. And then from the research scientific stuff, I kind of unpacked like, what do you actually do about it? Like, how do you start habits? How do you
Mm.
start rituals? How do you maintain momentum? Like, why do we get easily influenced by people? What do we do about it? So they kind of synergize in a way. They kind of go together.
Um, so I'm hearing a lot of stuff that I feel will land and make sense to a lot of people, right? I'm like, oh shit, maybe I do that. And something that I want to ask you is, you said like if, for example, someone and maybe a woman was having a shitty experience and I want to take that away, right? Because there might be this simple recognition of, because I don't want you to feel that. But do you think on another level, there's also like, it makes me uncomfortable. And so I want to take it away from me as well.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then did that flip if someone was potentially normal, neutral, or having a pleasant experience or in a good mood and you weren't? Did you feel the need to have them help you sort that out, or at least, or I need to not be experiencing this because otherwise I'm going to maybe change their experience?
Yeah. Like, even worse than that, I would say, like, if I was feeling shitty and they were happy, like, I would get jealous or angry at them and like subconsciously try to bring them down by being like passive aggressive or like, being sarcastic and but like biting, of like, yeah, well, like must be nice, like, go have fun at your party, like that kind of shit. Because overall what was going on was I had not reached a level of emotional maturity or emotional intelligence, let's call it, in which I was okay being not okay,
Mm.
right? It's like I hadn't fully danced with sadness and all of those other emotional experiences that we as dudes especially try to avoid, right? Who's listening right now? Like, who's your main? Is it mostly dudes?
Yeah, it's mostly
Like,
dudes.
handsome dudes though. I bet a lot of handsome dudes listening. If you're listening right now, you sound handsome, right? Is that the
Hold on, you
anyway?
sound you sound handsome.
Yeah. Well, we're obviously,
Yeah, of course.
and humble. We're very
Yeah,
humble.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and but we potentially avoid, and part of the whole idea of understanding the behaviors is why do we avoid it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a potentially many aspects to it. One simple one is, well, we've learnt that it's not a good thing to have emotions, maybe, but certainly to feel sadness and not have your shit together and not just be killing life, right? And so anything that kind of flies in the face of that, I have to avoid or stuff away or control, maybe.
Yeah. So we have a bunch of stories about the world that form the foundation of our reality, right? So if if I'm interacting with you and you're really sad and you're crying, depending on my background, on my past, I will have a story around what that means, right? So that will then dictate how I respond. If I have a codependent story and an upbringing like I described, like, oh my God, like Mike's crying, like I've got to fix this. Like, what's the matter, Mike? Like, what can I do to help you? Like, or if I have another lens, I might be like, oh, men don't cry. Like, oh, men that cry are such pussies, you know, like, man up, Mike. Like, what's wrong with you? You're weak. And I'll be like, and I'll say that to you and I'll try to mock you, right? But really, what's going on is I'm in front of you and you have water coming out of your eyeballs and you're feeling a certain way. And like, that's it. Like, it just is. Like, it just is what's happening. And so in that isness is a neutral kind of experience, right? And then I, as an individual, get to interpret that and decide what it means to me. And based on that meaning, I then get to decide how I want to respond, how I want to react, like what do I want to do, how do I want to feel even. Like if tears make me super uncomfortable and they really trigger me and I can't stand seeing other people cry, then like I'm going to maybe run away, or I'm going to push you away subconsciously by being an asshole, or I'm going to, you know, turn my head away. I don't know, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, or maybe like really try and make it stop and fix it, as you said, right?
Yeah.
And then do you also think that it could be you're going to try and decide, you know, as you said, you're going to potentially give meaning to it, but also try and insert meaning for me. Okay, so this is a bad thing for Mike too, right? So I need to, you know, maybe take it away for him because he might be really not enjoying this because it looks like it. He's got water coming out of his face, but maybe my experience is, fuck, I needed this cry.
Right. Like, God, I'm loving this cry. Like my girlfriend is so good at crying. She just like cries all the time. And she's like, but what you're talking about is projection, right? So what we do as humans is I see you having an experience and I put myself in that experience and I decide, man, if I had water coming out of my eyes, I would feel this, I would feel that, I would want that, I would need that. So that must be what Mike wants and needs right now. So I'm going to try to give him that thing, right? Versus if you go back to that isness idea, which I think is a word, surely, and it's just like, I don't know what Mike needs. I don't know what Mike feels. I don't know what Mike wants, right? And so anything that I attempt to do without that knowledge is just a guess. And guessing in relationship is not a high value proposition, let's call it, right? And so what
when you could try a different tact.
A different tact, which would be, hey man, how can I support you right now? Or, hey man, like, what do you need? This is a special, if you're listening and you are in a relationship with a woman or you want to be in a relationship with a woman in the future, like this is shit that I wish we would have learned in high school, right? This statement of like, or a question of like, what do you like? Do you need me to just listen right now? Do you want me to try to, are you in the phase where you're ready to brainstorm some solutions? Like, do I need to grab a cricket pad and like break somebody's leg? Are you in the humor phase? Like, where are you at? Let me know, right? And that question in itself is like, how can I best support you? Is a really good question to ask because it gives you actual reliable data. Like as a science dork, I love data. It's like, how are you feeling? Or like, what's going on right now for you?
Yeah, so it's giving you the information that you can then potentially do something with, even though that do something might be like leave me alone for some time or just sit the fuck down and let me, you know, cry it out or whatever, right? We're going to that example, but it could be anything.
Yeah, like, and this was a head fuck for me to learn that sometimes the best thing that you can do is nothing. So like sometimes in my experience, if my partner is really emotional and really upset and crying and, you know, has the nose snot all over the place. But and I'll connect and she'll be like, can you just hold my hand? Can you just be here? Like I don't want to be alone right now. Can you just be here with me? Like and also like, can you just not talk? Can it just be quiet? Like what I need right now is like a hug. Can we just do that? And that for me was really difficult to understand because that was not something that I've ever experienced as a solution. It was like, what do you mean you want to just sit here and hug? Shouldn't we fix it? Shouldn't we like stop the tears? Like, do you want a tissue? Like, let's make some moves. And
this looks uncomfortable. Let's get out of that to something more comfortable.
Yeah. Why are we choosing to be in this uncomfortable place? Because at that time,
but uncomfortable for you in that moment is the thing 100%. To recognize, right?
Yeah. And I hadn't realized that it's uncomfortable, but it's also temporary. So like, if I can just sit here in this sadness, in this grief, in this anger, and just feel it and let it pass, like that's the actual way to deal with that in a healthy manner. It's like, sometimes you just have to sit and breathe and feel some shit and then it gets better. Right. So I think, to wrap that all up, man, like ask 1 to 2 questions and then make a plan of action based on that, rather than just immediately reacting and trying to fix and trying to repair or trying to avoid or making a joke or any of these things. I would also add that if that's you, if you do that, then awesome. You've just had an insight and an epiphany, and you have data about yourself now to get curious. Like, like, why do I do that? Why am I really uncomfortable with sadness or anger?
Or someone else's feelings that I want to try and change because I think I'm helping them.
Yep. Yeah. And so as you suggested earlier, the attempt to help them is actually a subtle subconscious way to help you alleviate your pain and your discomfort from witnessing the tears coming out of their eyeballs, which is all that's happening, right? And so like when you can get to that space where you can cultivate that kind of, it's like David Data says, like, be the mountain, right? Of just, you're the mountain and the storms are all around you, but you are stable and you are strong, you're present, like other people's tears just kind of wash off you. You don't take them on. Like when you're in that space, that's a profoundly impactful, solid place to be. And I think that for me, at least, is like something that I've been striving to move towards over the last several years.
Very nice. So I know that you said to wrap this all up, but I want to keep digging into it.
Yeah.
How would you see, right? Because there's, with anything, I'm guessing, especially from your wealth of knowledge, there's like, I have an approach to something and then some new data, some new information. Oh shit, there's a different way of doing that, right? And so what I see is like this, often a pendulum and or this desire to be an expert at this new piece of information when I have only just learned it, right? And so in that kind of situation, perhaps some of the gentlemen listening, they might be listening to that and going, okay, so hold on. My partner, for this kind of situation, my partner is crying and having a shitty experience. Normally I would try and fix that and take it away for her, thinking I'm doing a good thing. And now you're saying, no, let her be uncomfortable and you just do nothing. Maybe ask some questions, but don't get caught into it. So could that be taken as don't give a shit about what they're experiencing?
Absolutely. And this is why relationships are hard. It's because there's a slippery line. Okay, let me step back. If you are in a relationship in which the dynamic is normally that when the female is feeling upset or emotional, that the man, that you come and save her, like the damsel in distress, right? If that's what's happening, then there's a codependent thing going on there, right? And so if you, as the male in this example, decide to change that example, or attempt to shift that dynamic, and your partner is used to you sort of being the savior, then you being perceived to step away is a threat to that person, because that's scary for them. And so there has to be this like mutual understanding that that like we're on this journey together, right? And also, like, I would encourage the conversation about all of this to happen before the water's coming out of the eyeballs. Like, when the water's coming out of the eyeballs, it's too late to then be like, I've been thinking about our relationship, and I listened to a podcast, and this guy sounded somewhat smart, and I've decided that in these situations, I'm just going to ask you what you need. It's like, no, because there's water coming out of the eyeballs. There's all kinds of shit. You're in it, right? So you've got to make a plan and have a discussion about your relationship, like when everything's great. So another example of this is like, how do you fight in a relationship? And like, I'm laughing internally that I'm talking about this shit, because like 3-4 years ago, I was a train wreck. I didn't know any of this shit. So I'm trying to like practice what I've been learning through the years, right? Yeah. So like, if everybody in relationship has conflict, like there's disagreement, right? So I would encourage and invite you to discuss how you're going to deal with that when everything's super happy and super good and super connected. Of like, hey, like when we have a disagreement, like what are the rules, so to speak? Like, how are we going to deal with that? Like if one of us gets really upset and emotional and angry, like what then? Like, do we take a pause for 10 minutes? Do we do some push-ups? Do we take a cold shower? Do we have a code word that we just stop talking? Like, how do we navigate conflict? So in saying that, everything that I said before about how to deal with an emotional person with water coming out of their eyeballs, like, it's better to discuss that before the shit hits the fan, right?
So you can come into any situation somewhat more armed. Oh, okay. Yeah. I have a better idea how to show up now. And also we have kind of discussed this, so we can work on it together, even if that working on it is, we just sit and be.
Yeah. And even using that as reference of, hey, remember that conversation we had at the beach when we talked about arguments and disagreements and what we're going to do? Like, I think this is an example of that. And I think it might be good for us to just, take 10 minutes and be apart, have some space or whatever. Like, somebody has to be the bigger person. Somebody's got to lead. And I think for men, that's a very solid opportunity to demonstrate that leadership.
Like, and it speaks to trust. Like, oh, okay, he isn't going to come in and bring some of his shit into this situation. He's choosing to support us in this situation.
Yeah. And there's a respect element there of like, that I'm not too much for him. Like, he's got this. Like, he can handle all of me, and I can trust him to be my whole self, to be my whole crying, bubbly, blubbery mess. And like, he's not going anywhere. Like, and that builds connection, strengthen relationship in a weird way. Like, your sex life will get better because you feel more intimate with your partner. All that good stuff follows. So, in my experience, at least.
Yeah.
But again, like, this isn't my wheelhouse. This relationship dynamic stuff. I'm not a relationship expert. That's not my jam. I am only speaking from reading tons of books and listening to tons of podcasts and getting my heart ripped out of my body a few times. And
practicing it, right? And I think that's the conversation that brought us into this, which was you learnt that you had a lot of codependent behaviors and tendencies, and maybe one of the key aspects there was trying to manage other people's feelings and emotions. And when you come into any dynamic, be it a romantic relationship or other, and you try and manage someone else's experience or emotions, either because you feel a need to fix theirs or because it makes you uncomfortable, that's not going to work out well.
Correct. Can confirm, have the t-shirt to prove it, all of it, man. It's like, and I think, yeah, like at some point, at least in my own journey, it was like, wait, I'm feeling really anxious often. I'm, walking on eggshells, I feel like, all the time. I also seem to perpetually upset my partner again and again. And I don't really understand it, or I don't really know what to do about it. And I've been drinking a lot, and I kind of daydream about other relationships or running away. And, maybe that's not an ideal situation. So, like, there's probably more to learn. Surely somebody in the world is doing it better than I am. It was kind of my scientific analysis of like, surely there's a person alive that has fucked this up less than I have. Like, so yeah, that becomes the journey. And like, from my experience, I'm sure you can relate to this, is it's like when you start to do a lot of these new things, these new behaviors, it feels awkward and uncomfortable, and all the fears come up that I'm not doing it right, and maybe there's some guilt and some shame, and like I always joke that it's like a newborn baby giraffe trying to walk. It's like that's how you learn. And like eventually you practice and practice, and then you're this majestic galloping beast down the savannah. But like at the beginning, being gentle and being patient and anticipating that you're going to make mistakes, that you're going to not just get it right the first time, that like it's a process and a practice. Like anything, like going to the gym, like you want to build muscles, like you don't just go to the gym and slap on a bunch of weight on the bench press and then walk out of there ripped with no, beer belly.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I know, it's crazy, right? It's like you go, you learn, like maybe you hire a trainer to teach you how to do some stuff. You develop a routine, you practice, you get better, you get stronger. It's the same principles with learning how to be a better partner, learning how to be more emotional, more comfortable with emotions, like better at communicating, anger management, conflict management, like all of these things, they're skills. Like you can learn how to love better. You can learn how to boyfriend better. You can learn how to husband better. Like it's possible.
Beautiful. And one of the things I think that I picked up in there as well was like, having conversations and communicating about how you communicate, right? But also, as you said, like asking some simple questions. Again, this doesn't have to be in the realm of a romantic relationship, but I realize in me there is a desire to try and fix and solve some things. And maybe I can still do that, but there's a different way of approaching it. Like, how can I support you right now? Is like kind of another way of saying, can I fix anything for you? Right.
100%.
And you might get answers like, yeah, you can do this. Or what you can do is listen, like you said before. And that is actually a solution. Oh, I can listen. Okay. Is there a particular way I can listen? Am I listening out for anything in particular? And you're actually getting to do the thing. It just looks different to maybe how we've done it for so long.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then like there's advanced levels of this shit of like, okay, once you got listening down, once you've got like not running away down, once you've got like, I don't need to fix this immediately down, then it's like, okay, connect, like relate, empathize. Like, God, that sounds so hard. Like, tell me more. Like these little like I swear, man, I've got like maybe 10 sentences in my life that I just use all the time. It's like, it's like, God, just like, it's like a deep sigh. Just, wow, that sucks, and just like that empathy. is
Yeah, well, you're
really
honoring the
helpful.
other person's experience, even in just saying
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah. And
You
I
are
don't,
heard.
yes. And I don't mean that in like a snarky, sarcastic, false way.
Mm,
I just mean that in like, I think having, again, like having a plan before all this stuff goes down that you can rely on. And so like in the moment, I'll look at my toolbox and I'm like, oh, now is the time when I feel like connection is the right choice. And I go in my connection toolbox and I'm like, yeah, like a deep sigh right now. And like at first, like this is literally how I would do it, right? It's like, yeah, I'm gonna try this algorithm. Algorithm in my brain says deep sigh. Try that. Like, what was the feedback? Like, oh, I got a hug. Like, okay, good. I've learned in the future that in this moment, when this
mm.
is happening, you know, X amount of drops per minute pouring out of the eyeballs, like a deep sigh is effective. This is just like my robotic, scientific, possibly on the spectrum brain functioning, right? But like, this is how it goes. And eventually what I've learned is that, you know, like any expert, um, they don't like a professional tennis player doesn't have to necessarily think about the steps to
Mm.
serve a ball. They just serve the ball. And when you practice this stuff, eventually it's just like it becomes more normalized. You become more fluent
Mm.
in the conversation or the subject of emotionally relating to a person, right?
Yeah, we become more skilled. And I think something that is, I recognize in myself as well, and I am guessing for a lot of the people listening is take away the other in this example, and it's just a nice little mirror that I get to understand the stuff in myself more. I'm experiencing this. If I go to my toolbox, what do I have? Maybe for so long, my toolbox has been, fuck this off. This is
Yeah.
uncomfortable. Run,
Mm-hmm.
leave, numb, distract. That's, one tool. And as the saying goes, right, if you've only got a hammer, then everything in life looks like a nail. And an emotion, sometimes you got to nail it and sometimes you got to caress it, right?
100%. And I feel like me in my 20s, to continue this really
Oh,
wonderful analogy, right? Is like I was like trying to build a house. If the relationship is a house, I'm trying to build this house and I'm hammering nails in with like the back end of a screwdriver. And it's like it's awkward and it's clumsy and the nails are crooked and it doesn't work and it takes me 20 minutes each nail. And I do that, the house falls over, and I do another house, another relationship. The person leaves before the house is even built. And then like when I'm 30 or something, you know, I hire a therapist, which side note, you should go to therapy if you want a better life. Therapy is cool. Therapy is for strong people and strong couples. So I want to normalize that shit. But it's like you go to therapy and the therapist or the coach or the podcast host is like, oh, you should get a hammer. And you're like, what's what? I've never, what's a hammer? And they like teach you and they show you what a hammer is. And then you go and start using it. And it's like, oh my fucking God. Like, why did nobody ever teach me about hammers in high school? Like, I've wasted so much time trying to build these houses, these other relationships that fell apart. And and everybody else in the world is using hammers. It's like it's that, but
mm,
for like emotions, communication, like self-awareness, acceptance, like all these other skills, right? So I think it's a really good analogy.
beautiful. I think it is. I think we can use that
I
because
look
then
forward
because then we
to
find that there are other things than nails, right? There's rivets and there's screws and there's oh shit. Okay, well,
exactly.
let's bag that or we'll keep going with it. So
Yeah.
okay, what I want to ask you now is, I think it's linking to all of this, and I certainly know part of what you do, and I know, um, I suppose we've covered it in part here in terms of your approach to life, right? The never giver upper. I think I'm putting too many errors on that, but
I think it's like a Kiwi thing.
um, you have a program called Do Hard Shit.
Yeah.
And, I know this of you as someone who somewhat willingly, because I can't speak to the amount there, leans into difficult things. Please talk me through this. How has this come to be for you? What's the genesis and how do you apply yourself to do hard things?
I believe that my life is easier when I do more hard shit. So all of the things that we've just talked about, like I've been cheated on, I've been cheated on again, I had my heart broken, my relationships weren't that great, I was broke, like all kinds of stuff happened. And I avoided feeling all of those things. I resisted asking for help, etc., because I perceived those to be really hard. And I just didn't want to do it. And eventually kind of came to this realization that life is hard in general. Life is filled with unexpected pain, and eventually we all die. So that's hard, right? And in that, I've also accepted that some hard things are better than other. And so I can make better decisions about what is actually a good kind of hard versus a bad kind of hard. So it could feel really hard to go to therapy with your partner and talk about your relationship. That's hard. And not going to therapy with your partner and leaving things as they are will result in unnecessary conflict, bad sex life, perhaps an alcohol addiction, anxiety, etc., etc. And that stuff also is like really hard. So
it's like a longer term hardness.
Yeah. So it's like you get to choose. Like burpees are hard, going to the gym is hard, but like so is diabetes, and like so is having your fingers amputated because of diabetes. Like that's also hard. I've been told. I've not done that. But like the point is that our life, I believe, is like a series of inflections, a series of choices, a bunch of forks in the road, right? And so the more that I can lean into like choosing better suffering, choosing more productive pain, the easier my life gets. And as a consequence of that, and simply as a lazy dude, like I want an easier life. Like I want to know how to have an argument with my partner for the least amount of time, in the healthiest way that results in the best possible outcome. Like that just seems very reasonable to me.
Yeah. And so the lazy option, just ignoring it and avoiding it, might seem easy then, but it ain't easy afterwards.
Yeah. And so I guess the big clarifier would be that I am a huge proponent of short-term pain for long-term gain, let's call it. So in the moment, in the hour that you're in therapy, it's gonna be hard. Like when I'm doing burpees, I hate my life and I regret my choices. Like when I, like for real. And I know, and I remind myself that in the long term, in the medium term, this is going to benefit me in some way. This is actually a good decision right now.
And so, because what I'm really getting in that is intention.
Yeah.
You are tapping into, why am I doing this thing? Right? So this might be a blanket answer and it might not be, but do you think then when you're doing difficult things, you connect to quite simply, this is good for me, or go beyond that to specifically why this is good for me?
I mean, as I shared earlier on my walk, like I often don't even make that leap. I just whine a lot and complain. And like, if you're doing burpees next to me, like I'll probably be grunting and being like, "Ugh, I hate this." Or like, "Wah," like poor is me. However, like when it's hard until it's done is another way that I think about this stuff. Is like once it's done, it's like we're good. And so I think breaking it up into shorter time spans of like, look, I just got to do 10 more burpees. I got 20 more minutes of this therapy session. I got like, 5 more emails to send, whatever. But as you suggested, connecting with the feelings or the sensations of the other side of this difficult thing are really internally motivating,
Mm.
and I think can be fuel to keep you going, to inspire you, in the same way that remembering or reminding yourself of all the great things that you've already done provides evidence of the changes that you're trying to create. It's like, you can do this. It's a foundation. Like, remember that time that we ran that half marathon? Oh yeah. How'd you feel? Like, oh, I felt like $1,000,000. I felt so strong when I walked down the street. I felt so proud because my friends and family were there. And, it's like, okay, like, we're going to do that again, but this time we're going to try to do it in this way.
So actually having conversations with yourself on some level, right? And bringing clarity to, why am I doing this thing and how have I seen these things work for me in the past?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And like doing it for yourself first and foremost.
Yeah.
So being internally strong enough to take the wrath or the teasing from friends or family and be like, because they're just projecting their own shit onto you as well. So like recognizing that inner spark or that inner knowing that's like, yeah, I need to quit drinking, or I got to make some changes. I got to stop smoking, or, it's time. Like, I've been looking at joining Mike's program for a year now. It's like, yeah, I should fucking do that, or buy the book or whatever. End the relationship, ask the girl out. There's countless examples, but we all have that inner knowing. And I think the more that we can honor that, the better our lives go.
Very nice. So choosing to do it for you as opposed to the risk of how other people might feel or view it or what they might think of you, some potential perhaps judgment.
Yeah, because there is not a person alive who knows what it's like to be you better than you do. So all of the advice, all of the conversations, all of the insights, like, nobody actually knows what it's like inside of you. And it's a practice, again, to get clear on that, to get still enough to tap into what really is going on inside of you and acknowledge it and be like, yeah, like, I really want to be a dancer. I really want to write a book. I'm supposed to go to Ecuador. I'm supposed to go there. Like, go and live your fucking life and live your best life, because guess what? You're going to die, and you're going to regret not doing all that stuff a whole lot more than you're going to regret like going to Ecuador to be a dancer and then moving back and being like, yeah, man, I just made some cool memories. I tried to be a dancer in Ecuador. That was fun. Like, Mike, you were like a rugby player overseas, right?
I was.
Like, that's cool. Like, you were at the time living your best life, chasing some dreams. Like,
yeah, even though it might not have felt like it in big chunks of that time. But I think that's also part of the point, right? Yeah,
it got you to
doing
here
some
and
of
now.
these things, we get to learn to trust ourselves.
That's
yeah,
it.
100%. It got me here. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm also getting in this then is this. Well, first of all, in you, but also a philosophy, I suppose, of doing you, living authentically, I suppose, might be another way of putting it. And that takes courage and might be the hard thing. But, it is something that I most definitely see in you, this dude who is authentic and real and at ease in himself. And I also see that's something that people pick up on because they share it with you on your social media and you don't shy away from sharing that stuff as well. So I'm going to just kind of put the spotlight on you for that at the moment. And I'm interested to ask you, like, what is that about? How do you see this kind of like groundedness? How does that like happen for you?
Laziness.
Please go
pure,
on.
like pure and simple, like laziness. So authenticity to me, like living an authentic life and being who you really are, to me is like the most logical choice for a lazy person, because I don't have to remember what mask I wore to that party last week when I talked to that person about that thing. And oh, I remember we talked about that thing and I pretended to be hot shit. And now I have to pretend to be hot shit again. And oh God, I really want them to like me. And so I have to, it's like, it's just easier. It's easier. How do I phrase this? Being yourself is the hardest, easiest thing in the world. Right? So we all know who we are deep down, but we've been sculpted by our past and the stories and all of these things and these desires and the ego and all that shit. And so that's what is complicated. So for me, I think more and more I'm striving to be authentic. I'm striving to use my full voice in a way that feels best for me. And like, just to clarify, I am certainly still a fuck up in many ways. Like you can have my girlfriend on here and we could talk about all the things that I have done wrong, that I am working on, that I said that I wouldn't do, but then I did it anyway, etc. So for me, I am 100% a work in progress. I am like a masterpiece nonetheless, though. Like I'm that's a good line. I might write that down.
Yeah.
But like I'm good as I am right now. I'm worthy and deserving of love and success and impact and all those good things. And at the same time, I'm still leaning into my shadows. I suggested earlier that like codependency has its claws in me. Yeah, still healing to do. Still find it very difficult to express emotion in front of loved ones. Crying for me is not easy. I'm getting better at that. So yeah, I think from a zooming out landscape, like authenticity is just an excellent decision because it's simple. And with that goal in mind, the path to get there is paved with difficult decisions, difficult conversations, difficult endeavors, doing the work. Like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this thing for years, or why do I do that? Oh shit, I have this part of me that craves this thing, and that results in a lot of pain and unhappiness. Like,
I have to give that up.
Yeah, and that's the other scary part. We could talk about another time, but like stepping into the unknown identity of who you really are and how you really want to act is potentially terrifying when you've spent years operating in a way that feels comfortable and normal and easy.
Yeah. And yeah, we could definitely rabbit hole into that because there's something so central to, I think, what you've just said. Well, actually, there's a few things to credit you, but one thing that's really landing for me is this, as you said, I am still worthy of happiness and all these things. And so there's this like acceptance of self and who you are, which I think for a lot of people is a big bridge. But what if other people don't accept me? Right? That's a big thing to deal with. But
Yeah,
the thing that I think, as you said so eloquently, well, it's just fucking easier. And I see this and I hear this from men all the time. In my program, we talk about like the mask that you're wearing. And one of the inevitable results when guys really tap into is like, oh, that's been exhausting.
yeah,
Right. And so the connection there, well, yeah. So if you want to not to be so fucking exhausting, just let go of that stuff. But in the middle, there is like a choice. Can I be okay with if other people don't like this actual version of myself?
yeah. And I would add to that, like you and I were friends with a lot of people in the personal development space with big followings and expertise, and everybody has their shit. Like everybody is figuring it out as they go. Like nobody is perfect. Nobody's relationship is anywhere as good as you think it is on the internet. Like the imperfections and the struggles and the dramas and the pain is actually what unites us. It's actually what brings us together. And I think that we need to normalize being flawed masterpieces, so to speak. Like we need to normalize like our imperfections. And I think that's something that you do really well, and that the work that you do is so powerful in that way, because we as men, we have this like veneer of like false bravado and like perfection that we feel we have to maintain. And like nobody deep down genuinely feels that way in my experience. So I think the more that we can open up and share what's going on, the more connected we'll feel to each other, and then consequently like the easier all of our lives will be. So like, why don't we try that?
Okay. I'm just letting that land. I'm just letting that land. Thank you. Philosophy 101. Nailed.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Like literally, if you're still listening to this podcast, you've heard my voice for like 45 minutes or an hour. Like if you're still listening, there's a great likelihood that you are resonating and connecting with all of the things that I've shared about myself that are vulnerable and open and like imperfect and flawed and weird, right? And you're like, I get this dude. I relate to him. Like I also feel this way. It's like, yeah, and so does every dude that I know. Like we're all trying the best that we can, and we're all figuring it out and fucking things up and learning, and like we're all just grown-up kids struggling to like have a happy life. And that's it.
It is. And I'll add to that, you get to be supported in that.
Yep.
And so with that said, and all of this said, Jerry, I want to wrap this up, and I want to thank you immensely for coming on. And I want to ask you, where can people find you if they do want to be supported by you?
Yeah. So I have a business called Long Distance Love Bombs. So I'm on Instagram, longdistancelovebombs.com. I have a podcast called the Long Distance Love Bombs Podcast. Mike Campbell has been on that podcast and a bunch of others you probably recognize. What else? I wrote a book. I've got some online courses. I coach people in groups and one-on-one. I recently am launching a program today, actually, called the Do Hard Shit program with a men's coach named Trevor Bohm. I have another online program called Get Shit Done 101, which talks about habits, rituals, procrastination. And all those ways. Instagram's like the main thing that I use to connect with people and share my work. I wrote a book. I gave a TED Talk. Like, got a bunch of stuff out there.
A bunch of phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
That is also still a work in progress, right? That's the nature of it.
Yeah.
Gia, thank you so much for coming on the Everyday Legends podcast. I'll make sure all those notes and all the things where this podcast is so people can find them and find you. Thank you very much, brother.
Dude, love you, man. Thank you for having me, and thanks for you.
Ooh. You've been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, with your partners, and in your world. If you have got something from this podcast, please share it with someone that you think could benefit from it, and please visit your home for podcasts. Like us, subscribe to us, leave us a review. Your feedback is phenomenal in getting this in front of more eyes and ears. Until next time, I'm Mike Campbell, and remember to build that legendary integrity.